My name is David Knapp. I'm the Associate Director of the Metropolitan Educational Research Consortium, or MERC. I see a lot of familiar faces here, some folks that are on our study team for this project, and just other folks who I know work in our school divisions, and we're so excited and glad to see here and grateful for your partnership. I'll share my screen here in just a moment, so we're taking a look at the presentation together. But I just made a note, or I just shared a link in the chat there around our resource list that's available for this presentation that we're doing today. We'll also share a link to that in the YouTube video that we're going to be posting online later on for folks who weren't able to join. I used to be a high school counselor before I came to MERC, and I remember at the end of the day, my wife would ask me what I had done that day, and I couldn't remember because so many things had happened in school that day. So definitely sensitive to like anybody who's able to join us from one of the school divisions. Just really grateful for your time, and I hope that you're well, because I know that things are definitely challenging in our schools right now. So that's part of what we're going to be really talking about today. I'm going to share my screen so everybody's able to see what we're going to be talking through. I just introduced myself. I'm joined by two fantastic colleagues who are going to guide us through some of the research and our approach to the study today, and really help to facilitate some rich discussions around defining and supporting mental health in schools. And we're going to start with almost Dr. Erica Daniels, who's working on her PhD right now. Erica.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, David. I appreciate you always. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. So I am a former school counselor as well. I just made the shift into academia as assistant professor at Evangel University, working within their online program. And I'm also the current president of the Richmond Area Counselors Association. So I have a very vested interest in understanding and working through understanding the mental health in schools and what that means for our students and what that also means for our faculty as well. So again, thank you for having us, and hope that you really enjoy our presentation today.
And Dr. Friend Harris.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. I am Felicia Friend Harris, and I have been working with Richmond Public Schools for the last 18 years as a school psychologist, and currently as the lead educational diagnostician. I am an educator at heart and an adjunct professor at Virginia Union University. And this topic is definitely near and dear to my heart, because I am committed to making sure that our students and our families thrive. And doing so by improving their social emotional skills and their mental health.
Thanks, Felicia. And we'll mention here in just a minute what our MERC model is in terms of bridging the gap between educational research and practice. But I just want to say at the onset, I can't effectively quantify all the things that I've learned from Felicia and Erica on this team, as well as everybody else on this team. So really grateful for their partnership and the conversation we're going to have today. In addition to the link that I threw in the chat, you can also use this QR code to be able to scan and get access to the study resources. And we'll have other links coming up shortly. So first of all, what is MERC? MERC is a research practice partnership. Our current partners are Chesterfield, Goochland, Hanover, Henrico, Petersburg, Richmond Public Schools, and Virginia Commonwealth University. So we're a research practice partnership between the School of Education at VCU and our 6 school divisions. We've been around since 1991 and done dozens of collaborative research studies. And our most recent one focuses on supporting mental health in schools. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Our model, just as some background, we're governed by a policy and planning council that's made up of superintendents and other school division leaders, as well as the research directors from our school divisions. And we meet quarterly with this body, and they identify key issues that they're facing in their school divisions for their educators and students. And then we design and execute collaborative research studies to address them. So I don't have a research profile. Our school divisions have a research profile that we address and execute in partnership with all of them. This topic of supporting mental health in schools has been identified as a potential topic for our last several cycles. And it wasn't until COVID-19 that it was finally established as the study that we really needed to make sure that we've prioritized. This is an example of studies that we've worked on over the last 10 years. So teacher morale and retention, a study focused on professional development and success for cultural diversity training in schools, school discipline study, equitable access and support for advanced coursework that's currently going on alongside the supporting mental health in schools. If you're interested in learning more about any of these, this is a link to our website where you can get access to these projects and all the resources that come out from them. Our study teams are made up of VCU faculty and graduate students and undergraduate students that serve on the research team and really drive the research forward. And they bring a lot of theoretical and methodological expertise to our projects. But really importantly, our projects are also led by study teams that are composed of representatives from each of our school divisions, like school division leaders and educators who bring a lot of practical expertise to our topics. So for example, for this study, we have several school counselors, school psychologists, social workers on the team, as well as folks in our school divisions who oversee psychological services. So all told, there's around 30 people that are working on this study that we're going to be talking about today. The way that we disseminate our work is through traditional reports, podcast episodes, through our podcast abstract that just celebrated its 5th anniversary, seminars like this that are available online, and then we have an annual conference. And in case you're interested in joining us next year, our annual conference is going to be taking place on June 29th, 2023 at Huguenot High School in Richmond Public Schools, and we're really excited about that. So really what we're going to be talking about today is this most recent study of supporting mental health in schools, which is focused on the question of why is it important to support mental health in schools, which I imagine is pretty obvious to a lot of the folks that are on this call. But to talk about some of the research related to this, I'm going to throw it over to my colleague, Dr. Friend Harris.
So as I'm sure many of you know, pre-pandemic mental health challenges were a global issue. And if we look at the Dayton study, which was a study conducted in England, 40% of children reported emotional, conduct, and hyperactivity problems. This increased mental health risk were associated with gender, deprivation or poverty, child in need status, ethnicity, and age. And so they showed that females were more likely to indicate that they had these concerns than the males who were part of the study. Another study by Rice et al., which was an Australian study that looked at the mental health risk profile of adolescent men. So there's a lot of research that is well documented that the mental health risk profile of adolescent women is different than adolescent men. The profile of adolescent women is a better indicator of suicidality, conduct disorder, substance use, and interpersonal violence. But this is not the case for adolescent males. Their profile is a poor indicator of these factors. And so this indicates that there is a need for prevention and intervention around the different profile for adolescent males. We know that males disconnect from healthcare services, but this begins during adolescence and continues into adulthood. This healthcare disengagement and the barriers are reinforced by societal and cultural attitudes. Real men don't cry. Real men don't express sadness or depression or anxiety. And if they do, they're told to man up about expressing these types of concerns. But this study pointed out the need for developmentally appropriate and culturally relevant models that proactively engage males to seek mental health support. So how can the mental health support teams of most schools, which consist of school counselors, school social workers, and school psychologists, support these students with these increasing mental health challenges? There was a study by Mason, Brink, and Hurley, and that was conducted in the United States during the early days of the pandemic. And they looked at examining how the pandemic was impacting the mental health services and supports of our students. And so millions of students were cut off from critical educational resources during the pandemic. 80% of children with mental health and behavioral needs rely on school-based services. So these students lost these services during school closure. This most significantly impacted students who were living under the poverty line and those who were marginalized because they seriously depended on the school-based services to meet their nutritional, physical, and mental health needs. Even though there was a lot of political discourse, relief bills, and discussions about the needs of these children, little was being done to actually address the needs. And so this study called on the pediatric medical community to advocate for their patients during school closures and advocated for them being a part of the discussion about reopening schools. They specifically said that pediatricians needed to collaborate with school divisions, that they needed to conduct research to look at the impact of mental health on their patients, that they needed to advocate for universal telehealth technology access for all patients, and look at outreach services, which consisted of mobile units and home visits. They also recommended advocating to reduce the barriers around health insurance enrollment for children so that they could access mental health and physical health services. You can go to the next slide, David. So Duin et al. Conducted a study in China to look again at this global pandemic. 24% of the children and 29% of adolescents reported anxiety. Increased anxiety levels were associated, again, with being female, living in an urban area, primarily because of the density of that area and the increased spread of the disease, and having an emotional focused coping style versus a problem-focused coping style. Having a member of your family or a friend who was infected with the virus. 22% of the children and adolescents indicated that they had symptoms associated with clinical depression. Increased depression was associated with smartphone addiction and internet addiction. They used a self-report survey which assessed both smartphone and internet addiction. That if students resided in the epicenter where the virus was quickly spreading, that also increased the likelihood of them expressing some clinical level depression, primarily because there were around more people who were being infected, who were suffering, and who were dying from the virus. Asanova et al. Conducted another study, and they did this as a phone study that they did in Ecuador, actually, with high school students. They were interested in learning how students spent their quarantine time, whether they had access to remote learning, as well as measuring their mental health status. They discovered that 59% of the students had both internet connection at home and a computer or a tablet to access the internet. 74% reported engaging in some type of online telelearning, and 86% reported having done some type of schoolwork on the last weekday prior to their interview. But two of the main problems that students reported were closure of schools and feeling socially isolated. 16% of the mental health scores indicated that these students were depressed. They reported that the pandemic brought on increase in the general prevalence rates of stress, anxiety, loneliness, behavioral issues, and depression. They recommended that teachers and administrators be mindful of how this pandemic has exacerbated these behavioral challenges for students, especially when they're looking at disciplinary decisions. Murata et al. Did another study where they assessed the mental health impact of COVID across the lifespan in the United States. So we looked globally, and now we're coming into the United States. And they looked at adolescents, adults, and healthcare workers. They found that adolescents reported higher symptoms of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and sleep problems than the adults in their sample. 37% of adolescents in their sample reported suicidal ideation, and 1.7% reported that they attempted suicide during COVID. Loneliness was the most common predictor across all of the outcomes that was associated with the number of hours that they spent on social media, their exposure to the media about COVID, predicted increased rates of depression, suicidal ideation, and behavioral concerns. They concluded that the COVID pandemic is associated with increased rates of clinically significant psychiatric symptoms, and loneliness could put individuals at an increased risk for the onset of these psychiatric disorders. Omari did another study, and they found that 64% of their sample in Saudi Arabia experienced depression. Adolescents in their sample reported spending an average of about 5.5 hours on the internet pre-pandemic, but this increased to almost 10 hours after the onset of the pandemic. Depression, anxiety, and stress were significantly associated with the amount of time that they spent online. Receiving ambiguous information about the pandemic was also associated with greater fear in the youth. If the students had fewer ways to access and find out information about the pandemic, they tended to have higher levels of distress. So this global literature search and research is telling us that the pandemic is associated with increasing rates of anxiety, depression, loneliness, stress, and other mental health concerns. So as school divisions, what do we do with this information when faced with decisions around reopening? So David and his colleagues did a study during the time of the pandemic to address this question by reviewing the existing literature related to schools reopening. And they compare that to the reopening of schools during other natural disasters, such as Katrina, after prolonged quarantines, looking at the psychological impact of that quarantine, and COVID-19. They looked at the available research on the current pandemic and its mental health impacts. The focus of the study was looking at 3 overarching questions. Why is it important to address the mental health needs of students in schools, which is what we're talking about today? How can we expect COVID to impact the mental health of students? And what are some practical strategies for addressing the mental health needs of students and personnel as they return to school? During the pandemic, the NAS study reaffirmed that all educators play a critical role in recognizing the risk factors or the warning signs of students to help make appropriate referrals. You can go to the next slide. So one of the first questions the research study addressed was looking at the mental health needs of students, which tells us that the pandemic is associated with these increased rates of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and other mental health concerns, stress, as we previously talked about. It also tells us that 80% of students pre-pandemic relied on school-based mental health and behavioral supports. So how do we do this? What role do educators play in supporting student mental health? Educators serve an important role in ensuring that mental health needs of students are met following an exposure to trauma like the pandemic, because the teachers are critical. They play a role in assisting in the implementation of these school-based mental health interventions. It is their ability to provide a structured classroom with a predictable routine and clear expectations, which will allow the students a reliable instructional space where emotional healing can happen. But we recognize and know that teachers are not the primary mental health providers or mental health support providers in our schools. Those are the school counselors, the school social workers, and the school psychologists. They are responsible for providing those school-based mental health supports in our schools. But the teachers are often the first line observers. They see and hear our students, and they're the ones who are going to make the referrals for these school-based services. So they can assist by providing a warm, acknowledging, and accepting space devoted to nurturing a trusting relationship with their students so that they can assist in triaging the mental health concerns of our students in the schools. Now, there are some challenges associated with providing these mental health supports, which I'm sure you all are aware of. The need that we have as a school to focus on academics. That's our mission. That is what we provide, is an educational service. But that also limits the amount of time that we have available to address mental health concerns. There's also a scarcity of resources. Schools lack access to community mental health providers who could provide services beyond what is feasible to offer during our school day. Following Katrina, many school-based mental health providers reported difficulty in connecting their students with outside community resources because either they were no longer available, they had extremely long wait lists, or they required them to develop some type of new school community support that was a process that would take time. They also indicated that they did not provide services during the school hours, which would assist our students. There's also financial challenges associated with this. When we're faced with COVID, it exacerbated any of our existing resources that we had as school districts. If we look at the on-school survey on crime and safety by the National Center for Educational Statistics, it showed us that 75% of schools in 2015, 2016 reported that they had inadequate funding to meet sufficiently the needs of the mental health needs of their students. And so while schools have this mounting responsibility, it is all of these challenges that they are faced with that can impede how they are providing those mental health supports for the students. So what are some practical strategies for addressing these mental health needs for students? Maximizing your resources is a multidisciplinary mental health team. Connecting with and building partnerships with those community mental health providers. Exploring alternative delivery options, which may include telehealth. Consider regular screening of students for depression, anxiety, and suicidality so that you know which students are already in need and you can monitor them more closely. Provide targeted treatment programs to address specific needs in students based on those screenings that you have conducted. You can go to the next slide, David. There was a study in California by Carver et al. That looked at, and because we recognize that while we are trying to bring our teachers in to assist us in meeting the mental health needs of our students, we recognize not only for teachers, but as school personnel in general, that there are some themes around burnout and around secondary stressors. And so this study was done in California, and it identified 5 themes around the issue of burnout. And so it said, first of all, teacher shortages remain a critical problem, as well as severe substitute shortages, which actually strain the teacher workforce that you already have, because teachers are having to either split classes, cover for their colleagues when they're out, and that leads to increased burnout for them, as well as dealing with that secondary stressor. The teacher pipeline challenges are exacerbated by state testing policies for licensure and inadequate financial aid for completing preparations for licensure. Teacher workload and burnout are major concerns. Teachers consistently report that this is problematic for them. The mass exodus from education, the growing retirements, and the resignations just further reduce our teacher workforce. Teacher residencies and preparation partnerships have proved important as a recruitment tool. And so they propose addressing these themes by developing a reliable pool of well-prepared recruits who are more likely to stay with the profession, building high retention pathways into the profession with teacher residencies, and grow your own programs. Provide financial supports to make entering the profession affordable. And there are a number of efforts in the Commonwealth of Virginia around this very issue. We do have RPS has a partnership with VCU for teacher residency. I know JMU is working with several school divisions to help make sure that they educate teachers, they're pairing them with mentors, they are financially assisting them with licensure requirements, and those teachers then have committed to return to those districts where they came from. Numerous studies have shown that following disasters, that self-care is an integral part of supporting educators following any type of traumatic event. And that when we look at the quarantine and look at COVID-19, the increased stress for students and staff is real. And it is so critical that we make sure that we understand that the people who are responsible for taking care of our students are dealing with stress of their own. And if they don't deal with their stress, it is going to impact their ability to successfully perform their job responsibilities and assist us in meeting the mental health needs of our students. We need to focus on staff self-care and mental well-being so that it is likely to decrease burnout, because study shows that that is important and that will happen. And we also need to make sure that we acknowledge when educators indicate that they are overextended, and that we provide them the opportunity to debrief and process any personal experiences that they may have, because that decreases the impact of secondary stressors. Studies have also shown that staff benefit from being appreciated, from acts of gratitude, to let them know that you see how hard they are working to help students cope and recreate a sense of normalcy for our students and families. Be aware that mental health support staff may experience compassion fatigue. Provide resources to assist your staff so that when this occurs, they can take care of their needs so that they can return and assist in taking care of the needs of our students and families. School staff must work to also support each other with walls of gratitude, check in, check out with colleagues, just things to help to support each other. You can go to the next slide. It takes every member of our schools community to support schools in addressing the mental health needs of our students during, and after COVID.
Thanks, Dr. Friend Harris. Yeah, so just in a nutshell, kind of a summary of all that, there are clear increases in mental health challenges in schools. COVID-19 has exacerbated that. Students in schools, so K-12 age youth, are 21 times more likely to receive mental health support in school settings than they are in community settings. Because our school counselors, social workers, and psychologists are so overworked in terms of like what their ratios are right now, we believe a lot of this is going to fall on teachers as well. We need to have a better understanding of what the workload is of teachers, as well as what kind of training they receive to be able to meet the mental health needs of their students. And this really is a big part of what our focus is for this Supporting Mental Health in Schools study. So considering how huge this topic is, here's a quick synopsis of how we're planning to address this. So this study was commissioned in May of 2021. And I mentioned before that it's been proposed before, but because of COVID-19, it seemed like this was absolutely the right time to be focusing on this. We started with having conversations and meetings with leaders of mental health supports and MERC divisions to ask several questions about What are your current efforts related to supporting the student and faculty mental health in your school division? What would be most helpful to learn from a MERC divisions about this topic? So considering this consortium, what are you hoping to learn from other MERC school divisions? What would be most helpful to learn from the literature on this topic? So engaging in the literature review process. And then what questions do you have about this topic that we could answer with our study? Following those meetings, we'd established our teams. I mentioned before that we have around 30 people who are working on this team, and several of them are on this call right now, and we're really excited to see you here. And a big focus of what we've been doing right off the bat is trying to understand what is our definition of mental health, considering the scope of this project, and trying to really determine how we're going to actually dig into this and be able to provide actionable and practical solutions for our schools. And we've gone through a collaborative process with our school division partners and VCU to be able to define this. And Erica is going to walk us through what that process has been like.
Sure. Thank you, David. So part of understanding the scope of how we can collaboratively work to meet the mental health needs of our students, both with our helping professionals, school counselors, social workers, psychologists, as well as incorporating our teachers into this. I saw in the chat someone was giving a kind of a encouraging word about how teachers are that first line of defense as being the eyes and ears with our students. And so now we're going to kind of walk you through the process of how the MERC research study team developed this common definition of mental health. But before we get to that, we're just going to take some time and have you give us your definitions of mental health. So if you would, you can take your smartphones and scan this QR code, or you can click on the link that will be placed into the chat. And thinking about how many individuals are represented here on this call today, and if I were to ask each of you individually what your definition of mental health, there would be some varying responses. So I just want to get a sense of that. So if you would click, like I said, scan the QR code, or click on the link and put in your comprehensive definition of mental health. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll process some questions together. So when you click on the link, you should be able to type right into a Padlet, and you can create your own entry. You can click at the bottom right-hand corner. There's a plus sign, or it might be a pencil. You click on that, and then you can type in your response, and it will, of course, be anonymous. But just share how you define mental health. All right, I see a few of them coming in. Mental health is your overall wellness, being able to cope and respond appropriately to things that happen, anything that affects a person's way of thinking in an unhealthy way, how we're going to deal with everything going on around us, and just reading them as they come in. Healthy relationships and stability, of psychological and emotional well-being. Thank you all for sharing. Finding stability, balance, and being able to bounce back easily and consistently. The emotional, physical, social, and individual of an individual, social and well-being of an individual. They're coming in fast now, David. I'm trying to keep up. Positive mental health, I want to read that one, is greatly influenced by environment and community. The ability to rationalize challenges, prioritize needs while resiliently growing and utilizing strategies to cope. an overall state of mind that affects how we perceive the world and behave, emotional well-being that impacts how we feel, a state of well-being in which you regulate through situations and able to access meaningful work, relationships, and leisure. Mental health is making choices that are positive for yourself, friends, and family. It is your reaction to your surroundings. So as we consider the variety of the definitions listed here, we can definitely see there's some common language there, some common ways that we think about how we define mental health, kind of our well-being, the impact that it has on us and our well-being and the things around us. We also see that it can be positive and influenced by a variety of factors. We can also see that it relates to our emotional, physical, social well-being as well, and the ability to be able to appropriately respond to stressors and struggles of life. And so as we consider these various definitions of mental health, we can see how in some cases, if we all have different perspectives and definitions of mental health, we are not maybe working toward the same goal in how we support and address the mental health of our students. So I want us to also take a few moments. We're going to put you guys into some small breakout rooms. And we're going to take about 10 minutes, and I want you guys to consider the following questions, and we'll copy these questions and throw them in the chat so you can have them as well. But as you define your definition of mental health, think about, one, how you arrived at your definition, right? There is some catalyst or some underlying foundation that allows us to define mental health the way that we do. Secondly, think about how your definition guides the work that you do, right? How you specifically define mental health and how that impacts your role as an administrator, as a school counselor, as a psychologist, or whatever your role might be. And then lastly, consider the other definitions that we just read through, and how do those definitions align with yours, and in what ways are they different? So David, if you want to shoot folks into their breakout rooms, we'll pop around and listen in on those conversations. And then we'll come back as a large group and process.
About 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Would anyone else like to share maybe one or two more?
I'll share. I was in the session with Susan Webb, and she said that positive mental health is greatly influenced by environment and community. And mine was mental health is the ability to rationalize challenges, prioritize needs while resiliently growing and using strategies to cope. And so we said that they were related because with the environmental influences and the community things that are going on around certain individuals, they will happen, and they definitely do impact a person's mental health and the ability to cope. But that ability to cope is what the mental health feature is. And so that's what we were kind of getting at, is that when you have challenges coming at you, when you have traumas and you have things just kind of coming at you one thing behind the other, what things do you have in your toolbox? What kinds of strategies have you been equipped with in order to be resilient and be able to overcome what those things might mean to you and how they might affect your life? And how can you move from those impacts so that you can be able to function in a way that is not detrimental to your overall well-being? Mm-hmm. So that's basically what we were saying.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's the combination of these positive coping strategies, along with understanding the impact and influences of the things around us that all contribute to a person's mental health. So thank you for highlighting that. Do I have one more, maybe?
I can share.
Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles White. I'm a special education teacher. I work out at the Richmond Justice Center. So I'm at the jail here in Richmond. So most of my students that I get from RPS, we still get services from 18 to 21. Been in the classroom when students were kindergartens all through middle school and now basically at the end. So I see those skills lacking in our students in the middle. And now, like I said, I'm at the end, and a lot of our students don't know those soft skills, those pro-social skills, and they never had a chance, or it was never given the means to think that it could be anything other than which the environment makes. So yes, we came up with some great definitions, but we extended that into the actual real world applications. Well, every day I have to empty out and not take anything personally because my students, they're still trying to develop that skill. So I have to be proactive in showing them that. So I have to forgive my students. I don't know what their case is about. I can't judge them from their past experience. These are still my babies, regardless of what they did or how old they are. I am called to be a teacher first. So the mental health aspect of the definition definitely extends into that classroom and is extending out to the real world right now. It affects people, it affects their families. But if we don't keep working those skills, we're going to have to deal with the outcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Charles. I appreciate it. And kind of to sum up what you were saying is identifying where those gaps in skills are, those coping strategies, and how does that translate into the real world? And, in thinking about what Dr. Friend Harris was sharing earlier, that it's all of our responsibility to be able to do that. At least that's what I think. So now I want to know what you think in terms of whose responsibility is it? So here's another QR code. That I would like for you to scan, or you can click the link that's in the chat. And so when we think about our personal definitions of mental health, I want you to engage and answer the two questions that will populate on the screen for you, on your screens or on your devices for you. And these two questions are related to, and once you get a chance to scan that QR code, we'll shift so you'll be able to see the questions on the screen as well. So once we hit maybe, I don't know, David, 50%, we can start the questions. So while you guys are still working, I just want to say that, having a definition of mental health really guides the work that we do professionally and personally. In one of the groups that I sat in on, they talked about how personal experiences really guide the development of their mental health definition, and how important that was to also function as an educator, but also how does that translate into supporting the needs of the students? So as you answer these two questions, they're talking about your responsibility. Is it your responsibility, or is it the responsibility of everyone to take on this task of addressing and supporting mental health needs of students? So for the first statement, it says, it is my job to support the mental health of my students. And everyone agrees. Most people mostly agree, completely agree, and others mostly agree. So we can acknowledge today that we personally feel responsible for addressing the mental health needs of students. And the second question states that it is the job of all educators in our schools to support the mental health needs of our students. And so again, that's everyone agrees to some extent. There's completely agree at 65% and then mostly agree at 35%. And if we have that belief that it's our responsibility and the responsibility of all educators, how are we getting there? How are we making sure that we're working collaboratively, that we're working alongside each other to make sure that those needs are being met? And so as most of us agree within our various roles that we are responsible for ensuring the mental health needs of the school, we also agree that it's the responsibility of all staff. So faculty, staff, the helping professionals, every educator within the school building is responsible for making sure that this happens for our students. So then where is the disconnect? Or should I say, how do we make that connection within how we define what mental health is to ensure that we're all speaking apples to apples and oranges to oranges, if you will, when addressing the needs of students? And so part of the MERC research team within defining mental health was to consider research and consider definitions from other agencies to help us build this common definition of mental health. So we looked at the definition from the CDC, the Virginia Department of Health, mentalhealth.gov, and also other literature related to mental health to help us define what mental health is. And so when you look at the definition from the CDC and mentalhealth.gov, these definitions are similar, but they're also different, right? So when you look at the language, I'm not going to read this to you verbatim, but when you look at the language, there's some commonalities, right? Along with what you guys talked about in your definitions, the emotional, psychological, and social well-being, also how we think, feel, and act, right? The influences that our mental health has on those areas. Those are the similarities that these definitions have, but there are also some differences. For example, the CDC's definition talks about how we handle stress and relate to others and make good choices. Some of you touched on that and alluded to that in your definitions of mental health. But again, it talks about some of those positive factors, those proactive factors, the things that we can do in advance that will help and address an individual's mental health before it gets to some of those damaging outcomes that we oftentimes see as it relates to anxiety, depression, loneliness, stress, things that we talked about earlier in our presentation. And so here we have what the MERC division, the research team has identified as our common definition of mental health. And it includes all of some of the things that you guys said, some of the things from those definitions that I just shared with you from those mental health agencies. But it states that mental health is a dynamic state of internal balance, which enables individuals to use their abilities to connect and contribute within society. It includes one's abilities to regulate emotional experiences, flexibly adapt to stress, orient to the present moment, create a sense of coherence, access empathic connection with others, cultivate a harmonious relationship between the mind, body, and take values-driven actions. Mental health can be evaluated and described by psychological challenges like depression, anxiety, and stress, as well as by the presence of positive processes like resilience, coping, and thriving. Mental health is a very important is important at every developmental stage from childhood through adolescence to adulthood. And so after much deliberation, we came to this concluding definition, this common definition. And it's longer than the other ones that we reviewed, but we were intentional about an inclusion of some of those specific elements. And we know that it is important for us to have this common definition so that when we are addressing who becomes responsible for supporting mental health in schools, we can all operate from the same definition. And so why is it important to have this common definition? There's a study by Acorns in 2017 where it looked at 771 Norwegian K-12 teachers. And what they found were two very critical outcomes. They reviewed the teachers' perceived competence to meet the need of student mental health, as well as their perceived responsibility to meet the needs of students' mental health. And so in other words, do I, as a teacher, educator, have the skill set to address mental health needs of my students? And do I believe it is my responsibility to address the mental health needs of my students? And so what they found was that the perceived competence of these teachers were lower for teachers who did not receive mental health training. And the questions that were related to competence in supporting mental health difficulties had a mean of 2.77 out of 5. So in essence, these teachers hovered between disagreeing and slightly agreeing that they felt competent to address those needs. And then on the other hand, this study found that the perceived responsibility of teachers was significantly higher for elementary and middle school teachers than for high school teachers. So in essence, more elementary and middle school teachers felt responsible for addressing student mental health than high school teachers. And the questions related to responsibility to support the mental health difficulties was 3.54 out of 5, suggesting that teachers do feel responsible, but combine that with their perceived competence, they don't feel like they have the skills to do so. So how can we bridge this gap? Teachers want to support the mental health needs and the difficulties of students, and they want to feel responsible, but they don't feel qualified to do so. So when we go back to our common definition of mental health, right, we're talking about student mental health difficulties, those items that are outlined in red, teachers sometimes will look at that and say, oh, I don't feel competent enough to address the stress of my students or to address depression or to address anxiety or stress. However, what we're implying here with this common definition is that we can empower our teachers to help students regulate emotions, to adapt to different situations, to create a sense of coherence and community, to cultivate a harmonious relationship, to be resilient, to be able to cope and to thrive. So having this common definition helps us to pull all of those positive skills and protective factors that also contribute to student mental health, but making sure that our teachers have adequate training and skills to be able to do that. Because as we stated earlier, this is becoming a all hands on deck endeavor as we address the mental health needs of students. And so this will inevitably expand our collective reach when we're talking about identifying student mental health needs and then even responding to and supporting student mental health needs. So now I'll turn it over to David and he'll discuss the current research where we are and how this will address how we are looking to address student mental health.
Thanks, Erica. So this definition is on everything that we do. Every survey that we send out, every resource that we're going to be putting out from this study will include this definition, because one of my main takeaways from that Ecorns article is that if you have a definition of mental health that's only focused on the mental health challenge aspect of it, then you might not feel so much that it is your responsibility to be able to address the mental health needs of your students. So we really want to try to take this kind of comprehensive view of mental health, and this has input from all of our school division partners. So just to give you an idea about what we're focusing on with this study, we are really trying to understand two things. One, how are our partner divisions currently supporting mental health and how effective are those efforts? So we've had these conversations with the leaders of mental health supports in our region. We know that there is a ton that's already being done in school. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, but we want to understand what exists out there and what are the opportunities for improving those programs and what programs seem to be particularly effective that could be scaled in our region. So there's a program evaluation component. And then the second piece, and what we'll have more of a conversation about today, is this question of how equipped educators in our region feel to support the mental health of their students, given whatever definition they might have for it. And so these are the two components for our study. The first component is focused on cataloging and evaluating existing mental health supports. And the second component is on trying to understand faculty capacity to meet the mental health needs of their students right now. Just quickly to give you a preview, we have an informational survey that's out in the field right now to try to understand what the existing initiatives are in our region. And we're putting together this dashboard that's going to be available in the spring of 2023 to all of the school counselors, social workers, and psychologists in our region, where they'll be able to go into this as an online catalog or resources like a clearinghouse of what existing resources there are related to mental health for students and staff and families in our region. And you'll be able to filter, for example, evidence-based programs for students with disabilities, as it just showed. Same thing for faculty and staff, but there's also a page for families. They'll have different filters for understanding what tiers of intervention are available that it's focused on, who's responsible for implementing it, how long it's been available, does it require additional training, does it require additional resources, that sort of thing. So this is something that we're working on that we will make available to all of the school-based mental health providers in our region next semester is what our plan is for that. In addition to that, we also are focusing on this question of faculty capacity to meet to support student mental health needs. And our research question that's guiding this is, what is the current emotional and professional capacity of faculty and staff in MERC Division schools to meet the mental health needs of their students? And this is really related to both what Felicia was talking about and what Erica was talking about, because we need to get a good definition here of what we mean by emotional capacity and professional capacity. Emotional capacity, as we're conceptualizing it, is really this question around what is the current mental health of faculty and staff in our region, right? So like if you're trying to meet the mental health needs of your students, what is the actual mental health of our faculty and staff? How are they doing right now? Research and just news stories about like teacher retention issues and difficulty with staffing and just burnout, all the things that are going on right now. We know that our faculty and staff are struggling with their mental health right now. We need to understand more about that, but also their professional capacity. So what kind of training do they receive? Pre-service, what could we be doing better in our pre-service educator programs here at VCU to support our teachers' understanding of how to meet the mental health needs of their students as they go into the field? And then what kind of professional development are they receiving as they're in an ongoing way to be able to work with their needs and their students and be able to support their needs? So we really want to understand both the emotional and professional capacity of this. And considering these categories of interest, these are the questions that we're really focusing on, is the emotional capacity of our faculty and staff in our region. So we're going to be doing a survey of this that'll go out sometime in 2023 of, first of all, how do you perceive the current mental health of faculty and staff in your school or your division? So I want to get some insights from you about that today, which then leads into the question of, what are your perceptions of current student mental health in your division? So based off of COVID-19, but all the other stressors that are going on right now, how do you perceive the current mental health of your students that you are working with right now? And then finally, what is the professional capacity of the faculty and staff in your region, in your school or your division, to be able to meet the needs, the mental health needs of your students? And then importantly, how do you see this varying by position? Because we have a lot of people on this call who I imagine are already school-based mental health providers. We also have several teachers that are on this call. Very curious to understand, like, how do you see this as varying by these different positions in your school and in your division? And we were planning on doing breakout groups for this, but I think it might make more sense for us to just have a full group discussion given the amount of time that we have left. And I'm really curious for us to just all be able to share some insights related to this. And I think it's important that we start with this question of emotional capacity. How do you perceive the current mental health of faculty and staff in your school or division? What's going on right now with your faculty and staff? Would anybody like to share just sort of an overview of how things are now relative to, maybe we can use the pandemic, so 2020 is like kind of the starting point. How are things now compared to when they were back in maybe 2019, 2020?
I can go.
Yeah.
I teach in RPS, Richmond Public Schools, and I hear all the time, overall, teachers are just really stressed right now. They say there's a lot going on with the students, and then the students tend to act out at school, so it's putting extra stress on the teachers there. But it's just, well, especially last year, they had to do extra planning in case students got quarantined or if they got quarantined. And so just overall, teachers last year and still this year are very stressed.
Yeah. Thanks, Don. That's been what we've heard over and over again, that teachers have increasingly been given kind of this impossible task to navigate uncharted waters. And eventually the stress accumulates over that. And that leads to a lot of what we're seeing right now. Does anybody have similar experiences to what Dawn shared or other insights related to this?
Yeah, I would mirror what she said. I think, unfortunately, our teachers are kind of falling apart. If people want, and I won't necessarily disclose my district, but we talk about how we're fully staffed, but that's not true on the outside, or that's what it looks like on the outside, but it's not true on the inside. We have teachers that are getting paid extra money to teach extra sections versus, because we've got to cover it. So the shortage, the mass exodus is really putting a lot of strain on teachers. And then it's just a trickle down effect, unfortunately.
I imagine that resonates with some others.
I see that in terms of teacher support. So I work in the teacher residency program, the RTR teacher residency program at VCU. And I see that in terms of retention, we're having people leave at greater rates and sooner than ever before. And so even though that model is a stronger model, in the high needs environment, but in all the environments, they're all high needs right now. I mean, but some are, yeah, anyway. So I just see that even though I answered, it's 100% our responsibility to support students' mental health. Teachers are not given enough time or capacity to do that, or training, and they're actually getting mixed messages. And so what they're being told is like, focus on this test to get this done. Oh, but have a morning meeting. Oh, but you shouldn't have a morning meeting. And so the conflicting messages just has them spinning their heads. And in some districts, they're not paid for coverage. And they're definitely, I see the teachers that came through our program, and any given day, they've got 6 and 8 different kids that are not their students in their class. Well, then, if you're creating this culture of inclusiveness, and anyway, you get it. But so echoing everything we're hearing, that this is, I'm glad that this is a new piece of this study, David, and to hear that, because that will be research to take back to these districts, right? To say, okay, we're saying we're going to do this, but because I think what happens is the buck stops there with teachers, and it's like, you have to do everything.
I also just want to add, David, I'm worried about the mental health of our mental health support team providers. In RPS, we are now 1st of November, and there has not been 1 week that our crisis team has not been employed to one of our schools. So you have the same people that are dealing with crisis after crisis after crisis, and a lot of trauma related to that. That's very concerning to me, in terms of how they will continue to maintain that pace throughout the school year.
And you mentioned compassion fatigue earlier, Felicia. I think that's a really great extension of what you were just sharing. So keep all of this in mind as we're wrapping up today, because we want to get some recommendations from this group of experts that's on this call right now. But let's transition. I'm curious, how are you perceiving student mental health right now? What's going on with your students?
I would say our district, and I know others, but our district specifically has seen a lot of violence, and it's hard on the students. I feel like overall they're suffering, and then some are directly affected by this violence. So I feel like, it's not necessarily great right now. Maybe not terrible, but it's not great. They're worried about the violence, and sometimes it's right outside the school. And so I don't think it's great right now. I think they're really worried about the violence that's going on around them.
And then to take that a step further, what worries me is that some of them are not affected. Which means that there is a numbness that has occurred and they don't see the gravity of it anymore. And it's just an everyday thing. And so that is a bigger concern, in my opinion, than them really. I don't want them to have to be concerned with it at all. But the fact that they're not being that affected is a problem, honestly.
And I'll say, sorry, that I'm not in Richmond, but what you guys are going through, I think outside perimeter people are empathizing with you, and they are directly and indirectly impacted. I know it's going to sound like a small thing, but some of the schools, their games have been canceled that they play. And, one of the things, and even my own son was saying, we were saying, it really sucks. I'm trying not to cry, but it really sucks for the kids at Armstrong, because they can't have a normal high school. They can't football game. Just things like that. And so I can't imagine the pain, of the families and the kiddos and the staff, but it's starting to trickle out, and people are really, I'm hoping people are going to start to see and make more effort to help these kids, because it is significant. It's significant, not just across your division, but other divisions, as these kids are, trying to navigate.
And Ashley, you've had your hand raised as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing that I noticed with my students is I think, we know that there was a gap in learning over the COVID years. And I think they are really, really stressed about their grades and their inability to keep up with the work. Like I feel really stretched with like the pacing for my class is supposed to be at this point and we're already weeks behind and these kids still don't get the things that we were supposed to be moving on from. And we're, this is the last week of our quarter. So they're, freaking out right now and they just don't know what they're supposed to know at this point. And so that causes, even beyond all of those really serious things like violence and health and all that, like they're stressed about trying to get through school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just quickly kind of piggybacking off of that, Ashley, I mentioned that our other study is focused on supporting access to advanced coursework. And so we've really been thinking about like this kind of connection between the push for rigor and the mental health of students. And that's definitely consistent when I was the high school counselor of what have students taking 5 or 6 AP classes in a year and like, doing volleyball. And I mean, it was so much to have to navigate. Kim, I see your hand is raised as well.
Yeah, I know I put in the chat about the attendance concern because which is often due to mental health, but I want to take that a step further in that most of the students were able to figure out a plan for them and get them back into the building and or get them to participate in homebound or home-based or whatever. But there are still a handful of students that literally like the doctors don't have any suggestions for us. We don't have suggestions. And it's to the point where like we have to hold them accountable for attendance, but at the same time, their mental health is suffering so much that they cannot participate in any way, shape, or form. And so that I feel like has been a big struggle this year for that handful of kids and for us to try to figure out those plans.
That's such an important point, Kim, because attendance is one of those things that's a symptom of what's going on with your mental health, the same as like academic achievement. That's another symptom of what's going on with your mental health. And I think that's a good transition in terms of like, what can we actually do about it to this last question about professional capacity, especially this last piece of how do you see professional capacity for meeting the mental health needs of students varying by position in your school or division? So like, how equipped do counselors feel about this versus teachers versus administrators? What are your thoughts? Do people seem equally equipped for this? See some head shaking.
I think, this is Patty Beach. I think that we know that there's an issue and then we all really want to help these kids. However, we all still have 24 hours in a day and we all still have 7 days in a week. I mean, it's just so hard to put more things on people's plates when it's already overflowing and we're trying to juggle and catch what's falling off and stack more on. And I think that's why everyone's so stressed and why kids are stressed, why teachers are stressed. It's just too much to do and not enough time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, Patty. And keeping that in mind as we're wrapping up here, this last question about professional capacity, I think is directly related to the question about emotional capacity and how our teachers and faculty and staff are doing right now. And so we have one final Padlet that we'd love you to get your input on, because one of the main things we're trying to do with this study is to try to get actionable things that our school divisions can do to be able to support faculty and staff and the mental health needs of the students in the divisions. So that's the link that I just shared there. I'm going to share my screen here so we could take a quick look at what people are saying around this. But what are your thoughts about this? So like, what's one thing that people that our school divisions can do, our schools and divisions can do to support the emotional and professional capacity of our faculty and staff to meet the mental health needs of their students? And this and the other Padlet we're going to be sharing out at the end of this so everybody can have access to these.
David, Christina Lunster here. The other aspect is teaching during the day and then coming home to your own children that are dealing with the mental health issue. So there's
Yeah.
a sandwich of us it's 24/7.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And some of the secondary stressors that are associated with the pandemic too, that are ongoing, all of that is so important to consider. So what's maybe one recommendation that people have? And as you're writing this, I'll just share a quick story. I had a conversation with a teacher in a school division outside of MERC who made a point about how he got an email from an administrator about an evaluation that was going to be taking place, or an observation taking place in his classroom the following Monday. And he had to do some things in preparation for that observation. So the very clear implication in the email was, you have work to do over the weekend. So it was very much implying that I'm not protecting your time. And that was something that just felt like a gut punch to his mental health and just being able to continue in the work that he's doing. And this was somebody who had been in the work for more than 20 years. So those kinds of everyday practices, I think, we really need to keep in mind. So evaluating what's priorities. I like the idea of expressing sincere gratitude. Really making sure people are seen and appreciated for the work that they're doing every day. Show grace and kindness. I've been reading a book on grace, and the definition that they use is grace is giving somebody there's allowing somebody to not be you, essentially. So like giving somebody space to be somebody other than you. So like grace is just trying to understand what somebody else is going through and giving them the space to make mistakes and grow just like you would want. Absolutely. Acknowledging the current feelings and emotions. Speaking about mental health, vulnerability. I've been reading a lot of Brene Brown recently. So this idea about vulnerability is just, being willing to actually talk about this is really important. Continue to share these in this Padlet. I'm going to share a link out to this tomorrow, but I want to make sure that we wrap up, speaking of mental health, to get people done on time so that you can move on to things that you need to do outside of this. So wrapping up here, this is our contact information. Please email any one of us if you have any additional thoughts or questions about this, or any additional resources to share that we can then help to distribute in our region. We'd be eager to stay in touch. This is the QR code for the study resources that I had previously linked. But also, you're going to receive a link to an evaluation tomorrow in an email, along with access to all of these different resources that we've shared here. But I would like to, I'll throw it in the chat as well, in case you'd like to take a look at this. Once you've completed the evaluation, it'll provide a certificate for the 1.5 hours of continuing education credit that you're going to get from this. But be on the lookout for an email from us tomorrow for this, and we'll have a recording for the seminar available as well. But thank you all so much for taking the time to share your perspective with us. This is great. And let's be sure to stay in close touch, and I hope everybody stays as well as you can right now, especially considering it's flu season right now. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. What was the book that you got that quote from? Do you know the name?
It's called Saving Grace. And I butchered the quote, but it's basically the opening of it, especially, is really talking about, like, it's unpacking the concept of grace and what it really means, and how much we especially need it right now. How we've sort of formed into a society that's gotten in the habit of not providing a lot of grace for each other. And so that's an excellent book that I would definitely recommend.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you.